She was a powerful CEO who thought she knew everything about success, until she secretly followed her janitor one night and saw a life that shook her to the core. What would you do if you found out the person you barely notice at work was living a life that would change the way you saw everything? That's exactly what happened to Victoria Reynolds, a CEO who thought she had it all figured out. Now, before I take you further, picture this. It's late at night in downtown Indianapolis. Most of the office floors are dark, the kind of stillness that makes you notice every little sound. The cleaning crew comes in like they always do, quiet, almost invisible. Among them is a man named Derek Coleman. He's not tall, not flashy, not the type who would ever draw attention in a boardroom, just a janitor in worn-out sneakers and a gray uniform shirt, pushing a cart stacked with cleaning supplies. Victoria, meanwhile, is the complete opposite. She's polished from head to toe, tailored suit, designer shoes, always with her phone in hand. People in her company see her as untouchable. She walks fast, talks faster, and rarely slows down for small talk. In her mind, people like Derek were just there, the kind of people you pass by without really seeing. But one night, something changes. Victoria had been staying late, working on a presentation. As she packed up, she noticed Derek through the glass wall of the office. He wasn't just vacuuming or wiping down desks. He paused, leaned against his cart, and pulled out a small photo from his pocket. He looked at it for a long time, then carefully slipped it back into his wallet. The expression on his face wasn't exhaustion. It was something heavier, a kind of burden she couldn't name. That moment stuck with her. The next evening, she saw him again. Same quiet presence, same careful way he worked, like he didn't want to disturb a single thing. And again, that same look, a tiredness that seemed deeper than just cleaning floors. Finally, Victoria couldn't help herself. She stopped him in the hallway. "Long night?" she asked casually, her tone sharper than she meant. Derek looked up, caught off guard. His voice was calm, steady. "Every night's long, but somebody's got to do it." There was no bitterness in his words, just simple fact. He gave a quick nod and went back to his cart. Victoria stood there for a second, staring after him. She didn't know why it bothered her, but it did. She couldn't shake the thought, who was this man really once he walked out those office doors? She had the power, the status, the corner office, yet something about him, about his silence, made her feel like maybe she didn't know as much as she thought. But that was only the beginning, because one decision, to follow Derek after work, was about to pull her into a life she never expected to see. The next week, Victoria found herself paying more attention than usual to the night crew, not because she had to. She could have easily walked past without a second thought, but because something about Derek lingered in her mind. She sat in her office on the 21st floor, the lights of Indianapolis glowing through the windows behind her. She should have been focused on the quarterly numbers in front of her, but instead, her eyes kept drifting to the reflection of the hallway. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of Derek moving past with his cart. He was always methodical. Spray, wipe, fold the rag neatly, push the cart forward. He never dragged his feet or complained. Victoria had employees in suits making six figures who grumbled more than this man who scrubbed their conference room tables at midnight. She began to notice small details. Derek hummed softly sometimes, though never a full song. Just a piece of one, like something he half remembered. When he walked into a room, he always looked around first, as if making sure nothing was out of place. And every single night, at exactly 1:15 a.m., he paused by the vending machine in the lobby, not to buy anything, just to sit for 5 minutes, staring at the floor like he was lost in thought. One night, she happened to pass by him near the break room. She slowed her pace, pretending to check her phone. "You're here late again," Derek said without looking up, his hands busy lining up the chairs. Victoria blinked. She wasn't used to being addressed so directly by the cleaning staff. "Yes, deadlines. That's the life of a CEO, I suppose," Derek gave a small chuckle, low and almost tired. "Deadlines don't care who you are." She didn't quite know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and walked on. But the comment sat with her. She wasn't used to hearing wisdom from someone who, in her world, didn't have power. Later that night, she saw him again through the glass wall of a conference room. He had paused his cleaning just like before and pulled out that same photo. Victoria strained her eyes, but all she could make out was the outline of a child. His thumb brushed the corner of the picture before he tucked it away again. She closed her laptop and stood by the window, watching him move to the next office. Something inside her was restless. She told herself it was just curiosity, but it felt stronger than that. She wanted to know why a man who worked so hard still looked like he carried the weight of the world. The next evening, she made sure to leave her office around the same time Derek usually clocked out. She timed it carefully, walking a few steps behind him through the lobby as he pushed through the glass doors into the chilly Indiana night. Her driver was waiting at the curb, but instead of climbing into the car, Victoria waved him off. "Go on ahead. I'll call you later." She pulled her coat tighter around her and followed Derek at a distance. His steps were steady, unhurried, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked past the line of restaurants still buzzing with late-night diners, past the glow of neon signs, heading toward the quieter streets where the noise faded. Victoria felt ridiculous, a CEO trailing after her janitor like some undercover detective. But she couldn't stop herself. She had to know. What she didn't realize was that this small decision, just a few extra steps behind him, would lead her into a night that shook the foundation of everything she thought she knew about hard work, family, and sacrifice. The night air hit Victoria harder than she expected. It wasn't freezing, but it had that Midwest bite that made her wish she'd grabbed a scarf. She pulled her blazer tight and kept her distance, watching Derek's silhouette under the orange glow of the streetlights. She could have turned back, she knew it. But something about the way he carried himself, steady, shoulders slightly hunched, as if he was bracing against more than just the cold, kept her feet moving. Derek cut through a side street, heading away from the newer apartment buildings and toward an older part of town. The kind of area Victoria rarely thought about. Paint chipped on the doors, broken blinds hanging in windows, a corner store with a flickering sign. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, her driver calling. She silenced it quickly. Right now, she wasn't a CEO, not the woman who had conference calls stacked from dawn till dusk. She was just someone curious, maybe even desperate, to understand. Halfway down the block, Derek slowed in front of a small building with a faded banner, Riverside Community Center. The place looked worn down, but lights glowed from inside, and faint laughter carried into the street. Victoria ducked behind a parked car, feeling ridiculous. This was insane. If anyone saw her crouching there, she'd look like she'd lost her mind. But her curiosity was stronger than her pride. Through the glass doors, she saw Derek push them open and step inside. He was greeted immediately, not like a janitor, not like someone invisible. Kids ran up to him, tugging at his sleeves. A woman at the reception desk waved warmly. And Derek? His whole posture shifted. The tired man she'd seen pushing a cart through her office suddenly stood taller, lighter, almost alive in a different way. Victoria's chest tightened. Who was this man? After a few minutes of hesitation, she walked closer, keeping her pace measured. Peering through the window, she saw Derek kneel beside a boy struggling with a workbook. His voice was low, patient. He pointed at the page, gave a small, encouraging smile, then waited while the boy tried again. When the child finally got it right, Derek clapped his hands softly, pride written across his face. Victoria pressed a hand to the glass, almost without realizing it. She had sat in boardrooms with millionaires who didn't show half that level of joy over someone else's success. For a moment, she considered leaving, walking away, pretending she never followed him, never saw this other life. But her legs wouldn't move. Then, as if sensing her presence, Derek glanced toward the door. Their eyes met, just for a second. Victoria stepped back quickly, her pulse jumping. Did he recognize her? Did he see her spying like some stranger in the night? She turned on her heel, walking fast down the block. Her heart hammered in her chest, each step echoing with a single thought. She had crossed the line. But deep down, she also knew something else. She wasn't done. She had to come back. She had to know the whole story. The following night, Victoria told herself she wouldn't do it again. She had meetings in the morning, investors to call, a schedule that was already bursting. But as the clock inched toward midnight, she found herself sitting in her office with her coat still on, staring at the glowing city below. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, board prep, 8 a.m. She ignored it. By the time Derek left through the glass doors, Victoria was only a few steps behind. This time, she didn't hang back quite as far. The streets were quieter tonight, only a few cars rolling past and the faint thump of bass from a bar down the block. Derek walked the same route, shoulders steady, his backpack bouncing slightly with each step. when he turned into Riverside Community Center? Again, Victoria hesitated, then slipped through the doors after him. Inside, the place smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant. But there was warmth here. A group of kids crowded around a long table, coloring, while a few teenagers sat with notebooks spread wide. A woman in her 60s was handing out sandwiches, wrapped in foil. And there was Derek, right in the middle of it all. He wasn't cleaning here. He wasn't invisible. He was needed. Kids called his name, tugged at his sleeve. One boy shouted, "Mr. Coleman, can you check this math?" Another asked if he could help with reading. Victoria slipped into a corner unnoticed, her back against the wall, watching. Derek leaned over a workbook, his voice steady. "See this part? You're skipping a step. Let's try it together." His tone wasn't harsh, wasn't rushed. He gave each child the kind of attention she rarely gave her own staff. And then came the moment that stopped her cold. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, ran across the room straight into Derek's arms. She had the same wide eyes as the child in the photo he always carried. Her hair was tied in 2 puffy ponytails, and her smile was so bright it lit up the whole room. "Daddy!" she squealed. Victoria's breath caught. Derek wasn't just a janitor working endless nights. He was a single father raising a daughter while spending his free time teaching other kids. The pieces clicked together in her mind. The exhaustion, the quiet strength, the photo in his wallet. Derek swung his daughter onto his hip and kissed her forehead. "How was homework tonight, Ava?" She giggled. "I finished before you got here." "That's my girl," he said, grinning. Victoria's throat tightened. She thought about her own childhood, growing up with nannies, tutors, private schools, everything handed to her, while this man, a man she barely acknowledged at work, was carrying a load she couldn't begin to imagine. For the first time in years, she felt out of place. Not because she was underdressed or unprepared, but because she was standing in a room full of people who valued things she'd long forgotten: time, patience, community. She backed toward the door, but just as she turned to leave, Derek's daughter spotted her. "Daddy, who's that lady?" The room quieted for a beat. Derek turned, his eyes landing on Victoria. There was no mistaking her now. Everyone in the company knew who she was. Victoria froze. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She had no excuse, no explanation for why she was standing there. Derek's gaze was calm, but firm. "Ms. Reynolds?" he said slowly, setting Ava down. "What are you doing here?" Her mouth went dry. For once, the woman who always had the perfect answer had none. But that moment of being caught was only the beginning. What came next would challenge her more than anything she had ever faced in a boardroom. The room stayed still for a long moment, all eyes bouncing between Victoria and Derek. She wasn't used to silence feeling this heavy. In a boardroom, silence meant power. Here, it felt like judgment. Victoria took a careful step forward. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just passing by." It was a weak excuse, and Derek knew it. His eyes narrowed just slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "Passing by? At midnight? In this neighborhood?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. He was right. There was no pretending. I wanted to understand," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. A ripple went through the room. Some of the older kids smirked, others looked confused. The older woman at the food table gave a soft shake of her head. Derek walked closer, Ava clutching his hand. "Understand what exactly?" Victoria swallowed hard. "You. I see you every night in the office. You work harder than most people I know, and then I find you here, helping all these kids, raising your daughter. I had no idea." For the first time, Derek's expression softened, just a little. He let out a slow breath. "Most people don't." He pulled out a chair at one of the tables and gestured for her to sit. "You want to understand? Then sit." It felt strange, Victoria lowering herself into a plastic chair surrounded by children scribbling with dull pencils. Her suit suddenly felt too stiff, her shoes too shiny, but she sat anyway. A boy across the table held up his notebook. "Mr. Coleman, can you check this one too?" Derek leaned over, scanning the math problem, then glanced at Victoria. "You any good with fractions, Ms. Reynolds?" She blinked. "Fractions?" "Yeah, he's stuck. Think you can help?" Victoria hesitated. In her world, problems were about profit margins, projections, and shareholder returns, not numbers on a worksheet. But the boy's hopeful eyes pushed her forward. She leaned in, pencil in hand, stumbling her way through an explanation. The boy grinned when he got it right. "Thanks, lady." Victoria laughed softly, a sound that surprised even her. It had been years since anyone looked at her with that kind of gratitude for something so small. Derek watched her, his expression unreadable. "They don't need much," he said quietly. "Just someone who shows up." Someone who believes they're worth the time. Victoria looked around the room. The cracked walls, the hand-me-down books, the kids leaning forward eagerly despite the late hour. She thought about her company's mission statements, the polished slogans about community impact that were more marketing than reality. And suddenly, those words felt hollow. She met Derek's eyes. "You do this every night?" "Every night I can," he said. "After cleaning your offices, after cooking dinner, after Ava's homework. Some nights I'm dead on my feet, but these kids don't get another chance. If I don't show up, who will?" Victoria's chest tightened. She had spent years climbing her way to the top, convinced that success meant power, money, recognition. But sitting in that worn-out community center, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Humility. But humility was only the first crack. What came after would shake her even harder when she finally saw just how heavy Derek's sacrifices really were. Victoria thought she'd seen enough that night, but Derek surprised her again. As the kids slowly packed up their things and the volunteers stacked chairs, he waved her toward the door. "Come on," he said simply. She hesitated. "Where are we going?" "You wanted to understand." Might as well see the whole picture. Outside, the streets were nearly empty. Derek's daughter, Ava, skipped beside him, her backpack bouncing. She looked up at Victoria curiously. "Are you one of Daddy's work friends?" Victoria opened her mouth, but Derek answered first. "Something like that." They walked a few blocks before turning into an aging apartment complex. The stairwell smelled faintly of fried food and old paint. Derek's keys jingled as he opened the door to a small two-bedroom unit. Inside, the space was clean but worn. The couch had a rip in one armrest, taped carefully. The kitchen table wobbled slightly. On the fridge, held up by mismatched magnets, were Ava's drawings and a handful of spelling tests with gold stars. "Make yourself at home," Derek said, setting Ava's backpack down. He pulled off his jacket and tossed it over a chair. Victoria stood stiffly, not sure where to put her hands. "It's nice," she said quietly. Derek gave a tired smile. "It's what I can manage." He headed into the kitchen, filling a pot with water. "Ava, wash up. Bedtime in half an hour." "Yes, Daddy," she chirped, running to the bathroom. Victoria walked slowly around the living room. There were no expensive gadgets, no luxury furniture, but there was warmth. Family photos lined the shelf above the TV. Derek holding a baby in his arms, Ava with missing front teeth grinning wide, a picture of a woman whose smile matched Ava's. Victoria glanced at the photo and asked softly, "Her mother?" Derek's movements in the kitchen stilled for a moment before he answered. She passed. Ava was 3. Victoria's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." He nodded, busying himself with the stove. "Life doesn't stop, though. Bills keep coming. Kids keep growing. You either keep going or—" He trailed off, shaking his head. For a few minutes, the only sound was the bubbling pot of pasta. Finally, Victoria asked, "How do you do it? Work nights, raise Ava, help at the center. Don't you ever feel like it's too much?" Derek let out a low laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Every single day. But what choice do I have? Ava didn't ask for this. Those kids at the center didn't either. I can't give up just because it's hard." Victoria lowered herself onto the couch, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She thought about her own life. Assistants who handled her calendar, drivers who waited on her schedule, a salary that could erase Derek's rent with one check. And here he was, stretching himself thin for everyone around him. Ava padded back into the room in pajamas covered with stars. She climbed onto her father's lap, and he wrapped an arm around her instinctively. She leaned her head on his chest, eyes heavy with sleep. "Daddy, can you read before bed?" Derek kissed the top of her head. "Of course." He reached for a worn-out storybook on the coffee table. Victoria watched as his voice softened, reading each line with patience, pausing to let Ava sound out words. The exhaustion on his face didn't matter in that moment. All she saw was love. Her chest ached. She had built a company, but this man was building something far more fragile and precious, a child's future. But as much as that night moved her, the real turning point hadn't come yet. That moment would arrive when Derek's struggle collided directly with her own world. The next morning, Victoria walked into her office looking like she hadn't slept. Her assistant noticed immediately. "Long night?" he asked, handing her a stack of files. "You could say that," she murmured. But her mind wasn't on the files or the upcoming board meeting. It was on Derek's small apartment, on Ava's drawings taped to the fridge. On the way, he read that bedtime story like it was the most important deal he'd ever close. By the time the board members filled the conference room, Victoria's thoughts had shifted. She looked around the gleaming table, polished wood, leather chairs, people in $1,000 suits, and realized how far this world was from the one she saw last night. Halfway through the meeting, one of the directors started pitching a plan to cut costs. "We outsource more of the janitorial staff, contract work instead of full-time employees, saves us millions in benefits." The words hit Victoria like a punch. Her gaze flicked to the window, as if she could see Derek right there pushing his cart, silent and steady. She imagined him hearing he'd lost his benefits, losing the health insurance Ava needed, struggling to cover rent. She slammed her pen down harder than she meant to. "No." The room went quiet. "No?" the director repeated. Victoria straightened, her voice clear. "We're not cutting staff like that. We're not saving money by hurting the very people who keep this company standing." A murmur rippled across the table. One of the older executives frowned. "With all due respect, Victoria, this is business. It's not personal." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "It is personal. It's always personal to the people whose lives we affect. Maybe it's time we remembered that silence again." This time, no one argued. When the meeting finally ended, Victoria stayed behind, staring out at the skyline. She felt a strange mix of anger, clarity, and responsibility. For years, she had measured success by profits. But now, she couldn't stop seeing Derek's face, Ava's smile, the kids at the community center. Later that week, she found herself back at Riverside, this time not hiding in the corner. She walked straight through the doors, holding a box of new supplies she'd had delivered, notebooks, pencils, even a couple of laptops from her company's surplus. Derek looked up, surprised. "What's all this?" She set the box on the table. "It's a start. You shouldn't have to carry this alone." The kids crowded around, excitedly pulling out the items. The older woman at the desk gave Victoria a smile she hadn't seen in years, one of genuine gratitude, not corporate politeness. Derek crossed his arms, studying her. "Why are you really here, Ms. Reynolds?" Victoria met his eyes, her voice steady. "Because I was wrong. I thought I understood what mattered. I didn't. Not until now." For a long moment, Derek didn't say anything. Then he gave a small nod, almost like an approval she hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. But the true test of her change wasn't what she gave. It was what she chose to do next, when her company and her conscience finally collided head-on. Weeks passed, but Victoria wasn't the same. The board noticed it. Her staff noticed it. Even Derek noticed it. She didn't just stop by the community center once. She kept coming back, sometimes with supplies, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit with the kids and help with fractions or spelling, awkward at first, but slowly growing more natural. The kids started calling her Miss V. At first, she laughed it off, but secretly it warmed her. She hadn't felt that kind of simple acceptance in years. One evening, as Derek packed up chairs, Victoria lingered near the door. Ava had already fallen asleep on a blanket in the corner. "You know," Derek said, stacking one last chair, "I never asked why you kept showing up." Victoria leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "Maybe because I needed to. Maybe because I realized I've spent years looking at numbers instead of people. You opened my eyes." Derek gave her a long look, then shook his head with a half smile. "I didn't open your eyes. You just finally decided to see." The words hit deeper than she expected. Later that week, back at the office, Victoria called another meeting with her leadership team. This time, she wasn't talking about cutting costs or chasing market trends. She rolled out a new initiative, company-funded scholarships for employees' children, expanded benefits for janitorial and maintenance staff, and a direct partnership with Riverside Community Center. Some executives protested. It's too much money. Shareholders won't like it. Victoria didn't flinch. Shareholders don't build this company. People do, and if we can't take care of our people, what exactly are we proud of? Silence again, but this time she knew she had won. That evening, she drove herself to the community center. No driver, no assistant, just her. She walked in to find Derek helping a teenager with an essay. Ava was coloring at a nearby table. When she explained the new company programs, the room lit up. The older woman at the desk clapped her hands together. The teenagers cheered. Even Ava beamed, running to hug her dad. Derek looked at Victoria, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just stood there, arms crossed. Then finally, he extended a hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Victoria shook it, her grip firm. "No, thank you." The weight of those words hung between them, not as CEO and janitor, not as boss and employee, but as two people who finally understood each other. That night, walking back to her car, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not success. Something quieter, something deeper. Peace. She realized then that real change doesn't start with billion-dollar deals or corner offices. It starts with seeing the people right in front of you, the ones you pass by every day without a second thought. People like Derek, people carrying worlds you know nothing about. And sometimes, all it takes is stopping long enough to notice. Because when you do, it can change everything. If there's one thing Victoria learned, and one thing we can take from her story, it's this. Your title, your salary, your status mean nothing if you can't look at another human being and recognize their worth. The people you overlook, the ones you think are just background noise in your life, might be carrying the heaviest loads with the quietest strength. So here's the challenge. Next time you're tempted to ignore the janitor, the cashier, the delivery driver, stop. Look them in the eye. Treat them with dignity, because behind every uniform is a story you don't know yet. And if Victoria Reynolds could change, so can you. If this story moved you, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. Let it remind you to see people fully, not just for the work they do, but for the lives they lead. Because sometimes, noticing someone is the first step to changing not just their life, but your own.